Hi there, welcome to Drick's room. My name is Drick. Today we're going to be taking a look at college supplemental essays, which I believe are the reason between getting into a school or not getting into a school. Might be a bit of a hot take there, but let me explain. So with the Common App, almost everything is the same across all of your applications, with maybe the exception of what programs you're applying to, or like if you're a legacy to a certain school. For the most part though, the only thing that really differs between your application to one school versus that of another is the supplemental essays. I imagine that there are probably some hidden underlying factors at play, but in my mind it's like, if I get into one school and not another, and everything about the two applications is the same besides the supplemental essays, doesn't that mean the supplemental essays are what made the difference? They seem to be the only independent variable at play. But I suppose this would only be the case if the rest of the Common App is already really solid. But I mean, who knows what's going on? I certainly don't, because after all, I am not an admissions officer, college counselor, or any other type of person with professional knowledge of the college admissions process. Everything I say here comes from my own experiences, so I recommend you all take my words with a grain of salt. And since we're talking about supplemental essays today, I thought I'd link a video down in the description to some supplemental essays for certain schools I was accepted to. But again, college admissions are very subjective and case by case, so what worked for me won't necessarily work for you. Nonetheless, if you are curious about what my essays look like, feel free to take a look. Alright, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to talk about how supplemental essays differ from the Common App essay, or at least how I approach them differently. So on one hand, you've got the Common App essay, which gives you 650 words to tell a story about the development of your personal character. And on the other hand, you've got supplemental essays, which usually give you fewer words but are more numerous and aim to look at your personality and interests and see how you would fit into the school. Both types of essays are going to give insight into your personal character as well as your interests and fit, but I see them as focusing on one more than the other. The Common App essay is longer and is sent to all your schools, so it tends to be a bit broader in scope, which lends itself to looking at your overarching development as a person. Supplemental essays are shorter, but since they're also more numerous, they can be more specific and get at different parts of your personality as well as your interests and hobbies to see how that would fit into their school in particular. In the case of either essay though, the ultimate goal is to support your candidacy as a prospective student, but their different format and structure means that they reach the same end goal in different ways, which can potentially change how you approach writing a certain essay. In my experience, I approached my supplemental essays pretty differently from how I approached the Common App essay. But even if it doesn't, drastically change how you go about the different essays, it'll still be helpful to be aware of the difference. And since there are so many different types of supplemental essays that vary between schools, from why us and why major essays to prompts asking about your favorite books or what you do in your free time, I think that the different types of supplemental essays warrant their own videos because they can be very different from one another in a number of ways. So we'll save those for another time, but for now, we'll look at the concept of supplemental essays as a whole and being as specific as possible with advice while still being general enough to apply to most types of supplemental essays. A lot of advice I gave in my Common App essay video is gonna apply to the supplemental essays too, but one thing you will have to do differently here is research on the specific schools that the supplemental essays are for. The Common App essay, as the name implies, is common across all your applications, so it would be weird to write about specific schools in your Common App essay. Like, you wouldn't want to talk about Yale in your Common App essay if it's also going to be sent to Harvard. You may be thinking that that's obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people actually do that. Alright, so we got a bit off track there, but supplemental essays. Research. So some supplemental essays are going to be asking about things that relate to their school specifically. They may have prompts about why you chose to apply to their school, what their mission statement means to you, what things you look forward to in college, stuff like that. For essays like these, which are basically some variation of the Why Us essay, you're gonna have to do some specific research on the school. This is because you want to avoid more surface level things like location, academic rigor, and things of that nature, because writing about those things will keep you from writing a more unique essay. Instead, you might want to talk about certain professors, certain classes, certain special programs, things of that nature. It'll save you from the mistake of being too general to the point where you could submit the same essay to another school and still have it make sense. And it'll also show the school that you've done your homework, so to speak, and that you're at least somewhat invested in them. But it's also important to not be so on the nose about it. It shouldn't be so formulaic that it's obvious that you were actively searching for something on the school's website to fit for this prompt. Because then, in my opinion, it sounds like you're trying to tell the school stuff about itself, as if the school doesn't already know these things. For example, imagine you're applying to the Xavier Institute, and for one of their supplemental essays you write, "The Xavier Institute has a phenomenal mathematics department. I hope to take classes under the world-renowned Professor Scott Summers because I am interested in his research on non-Euclidean geometry." Maybe it's just me, but being so on the nose about it kinda lacks personality. This is actually something I did in essays for a couple schools, which also happened to be some of the schools I didn't get into. Could just be correlation, but it's still worth putting it out there. I think it'd be better to, sprinkle in a name drop here and there. I think it'll flow much better if you can skillfully and subtly weave this kind of specific information into your essay while still having it flow naturally. And as you're doing research, you might find things comparing different schools on a number of different metrics. I would really advise against talking about other schools in your supplemental essays, even if it's to show that the school the essay is for is better than other schools. Whether you do it directly or indirectly, it still rubs off the wrong way when you say school X is better than school Y and school Z. I would just avoid talking about other schools at all, kinda like I mentioned earlier with the Common App essay. Backtracking a bit, earlier I talked about how the supplemental essays are better suited for looking at more specific details about your personality, your interests, etc. And an important part of this is going to be how you present your voice through your writing. The tone you use is going to depend on the prompt for a given essay. Some prompts are more serious while others are more quirky, and your tone should reflect that for the most part. Generally though, these essays are going to be more creative and less academic in voice and subject than a lot of other things you'd be writing in high school. Part of your voice is going to be showing your unique qualities, because anyone can write about their favorite book or extracurricular activity, but not everyone can do it in a unique and memorable way. In terms of subject matter, don't be afraid to reveal the true you. It's obvious to admissions officers, I'd say, that the life of a high schooler does not revolve around school-related activities. If you want to write your essay about anime or K-pop or video games, go for it. You shouldn't worry about how you're going to be perceived, because if nothing else, your essays will be a truer reflection of who you are. Write as yourself, not as the person you want to be seen as. I could go into a whole discussion about facades and college admissions, but again, another topic for another day. But for now, I know it's gonna sound cringe and cheesy, but just be yourself. And maybe one way to get at your truest self is to write your essays an hour before your application is due, but I digress. Shifting gears a bit, I briefly mentioned how supplemental essays are usually much shorter than the Common App essay. There are some exceptions like the Cornell essay or one of the Princeton essays, but most supplemental essays are only a few hundred words at most. Some students can feel pigeonholed by the small word count and end up underwriting. I would recommend taking the opposite approach, where you write everything you need to say and then cut it down from there. It would be even better if you just don't look at the word count to begin with and just write. You know, you can always cut out fluff like redundant or superfluous phrases at a later time. Oftentimes, you'll write something and later realize that it doesn't even need to be there, so you can save a bunch of word space that way. You can also do some fancy magic with punctuation, like em dashes, colons, and semicolons, because those are super helpful for cutting down words. Knowing how to use punctuation is like the secret sauce for supplemental essays. On a completely different note, sometimes prompts will be super similar between schools. If you're asking yourself if you can recycle essays, the answer is yes, with a little asterisk right here. Little asterisk. It's really going to depend on the prompt. A couple schools have a prompt like describe an extracurricular activity or something like that. Stanford, Harvard, and a couple other schools have the same exact prompt word for word. In that case, recycle your essays. But sometimes essays will have very similar prompts but switch out the name of one school for another. In those cases, it's usually fine to have the same overall message for your essay, but you'll have to tweak a couple things here and there to help it fit better for that particular school. This is also the case if prompts are the same but have different word counts. If you have an essay that's 150 words and another school has the same prompt for 250 words, it's going to be really obvious that you just copied over that essay. Since you have more space, or less space if you're going from a higher word count to a lower one, you want to make changes to your essay to fit that word count. It's not necessary to hit the word limit exactly, but that's usually what happens anyways. My final point today is that across your supplemental essays, you want to be able to bring everything together. You want to have a level of coherence between your essays and all the other parts of your application. I've talked previously about having a theme or personal narrative to your application as a whole, and these supplemental essays are really good for tying different parts of your application together to develop that theme. These supplemental essays can be really good for connecting your extracurricular activities to your Common App essay, to your intended major, to your personal hobbies, and so on. Your supplemental essays are kind of like the string that connects the different parts of your application together into one big web. This means that you shouldn't write in a vacuum, which means that you only look at one essay at a time without considering the other parts of your application. If you talked about how you like to volunteer at the hospital, you shouldn't repeat the same exact thing for another essay for the same school. It's fine to have the same general subject, but you should try to take different angles of it. Like for one prompt, you can talk about how volunteering at the hospital made you interested in biomedical research. And in another prompt, you can talk about how volunteering at the hospital helped you make new friends. That's not the greatest example, but the point I'm trying to get at here is that you don't want to say the same thing in the same way every time. There are a number of different parts to your application, and each one of them has their own role to fill. You gotta look at the bigger picture. You don't want to repeat yourself over and over because it prevents you from really fleshing out your character and showing that you're an interesting and unique individual. And frankly, it would make the applicant seem kind of boring if their whole being revolves around just one thing. So yeah. So that's about it for the more general advice I have for the supplemental essays. Maybe I'll go more into specifics for certain types of supplemental essays at a later date, but who knows. For now, if you guys are interested in seeing some of my own supplemental essays, be sure to check out the link in the description. If you found this video helpful, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!